This conference will now be recorded.
The October 12th, 2021 Planning Commission will please come to order. Call the roll, please, Julie.
Commissioner Shower.
Here.
Commissioner Bluffus. Commissioner Atkins.
Here.
Commissioner Haroon. Commissioner Schulte.
Here.
Commissioner Pyle.
Here.
And Chair Liddell.
Here. We have two excused absences of commissioners this evening, Commissioner Bluffus and Commissioner Haroon. We need separate motions.
Commissioner Shower, I would move to excuse Commissioner Bluffus.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Shower and seconded by Commissioner Pyle to excuse the absence of Commissioner Bluffus. Julie, please call the roll.
Commissioner Shower.
Approved.
Commissioner Atkins.
Yes, approved.
Commissioner Schulte.
Yes, approved.
Vice Chair Pyle.
Yes.
And Chair Liddell.
Yes. We need a second motion.
Commissioner Shower, I would move to excuse, excuse me. Apologize. I've lost track of names now. Move to excuse Commissioner
Haroon?
Haroon. Thank you. From this meeting. Thank you.
It's been moved by Commissioner Shower and seconded by Commissioner Pyle to excuse Commissioner Haroon. Please call the roll, Julie.
Commissioner Shower.
Approved.
Commissioner Atkins.
Approved.
Commissioner Schulte.
Approved.
Vice Chair Pyle.
Approved.
Chair Liddell.
Approve. Both commissioners are excused from this evening's meeting. We will defer the minutes for July 6th because two of the people who need to be here to approve them are absent this evening. So are there changes or comments to the minutes for July 27th?
Yes, this is Commissioner Schulte, and I do have a change. I spoke with Brian Snodgrass this morning, and he confirmed something we found in the draft document. So if we go to page 2 of 6, about halfway down, again, this is the July 27th, 2021 meeting minutes. About halfway down, there are words. Let me just read section 30 and 2690. Section 30 and 2690. Those words need to be struck and replaced with the sentence, the passage, the section 30 sub-area plan and VMC 20.690 plan district. I'll read that again. The section 30 sub-area plan and VMC 20.690 plan district. That would be inserted where the words section 30 and 2690 are taken out.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, the chair's ready for a motion regarding the minutes.
This is Commissioner Schulte, and I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the meeting minutes for July 27th, 2021 as written, but with the change that I just made.
Okay. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Atkins. I second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Schulte and seconded by Commissioner Atkins to approve the July 27th, 2021 minutes with the changes made this evening. Please call the roll, Julie.
Commissioner Shower.
Approved.
Commissioner Atkins.
Approved.
Commissioner Schulte.
Approved.
Vice Chair Pyle.
Approved.
And Chair Liddell.
Approve. The July 27th, 2021 minutes are approved. So there are no communications from the chair. Do you have any communication, Rebecca?
No substantive communication. Just wanted to remind everybody who's listening tonight, if you're not presenting and you're not a commissioner or staff, please turn off your video. It just helps so we can all kind of see each other and see where when commissioners want to raise their hands to speak. So that's just a process reminder. And then I also wanted to just remind the commission and the public that we will be continuing virtual at least for the next few months for city policy. And I will provide updates as soon as we are going to move to a hybrid in-person virtual format. But I anticipate that that's likely still at least a few months away. So that's my only update, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, your voice is a little bit halting, or I couldn't hear it too clearly, but I think we got the message. And part of your message is those who are not speaking or presenting should turn their video off.
Yes, that's correct. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So we're ready to move to the first item. Do you have any introductory comments, Rebecca?
Yes, I do have introductory comments here before I turn it over to Keith Jones, the senior planner, who will be leading the presentation. So this is the HQ master plan is a master plan that is proposed in the Riverview Gateway subarea and the Fisher's Quarry portion of the Riverview Gateway subarea. What is before the commission tonight and will be in front of you for future meetings is a master plan that follows the provisions of the RGX or Riverview Gateway Mixed Use Zoning District and the sub-area plan. There is no development agreement being proposed along with this. It's just the master plan. And the zoning is not being proposed to be changed except for in some limited circumstance, which staff will walk through. So just wanted to kind of clarify the frame of what we are looking at tonight and going forward. And with that, I will turn it over to Keith Jones, senior planner.
Good evening, Chair Liddell, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Keith Jones. I'm a senior planner. I work in development review for the city of Vancouver. Next slide, please.
Just one question, Mr. Jones, you have 27 slides. Were you going to stop somewhere for questions, or would you prefer to go through them and then we ask questions?
Chair Liddell, I think for tonight's meeting, just since it's our first look at this, I think I'd prefer to go through those and then reserve the end of our time for questions, if that works for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So for tonight's overview of the presentation, I'm going to go through the Riverview Gateway Subarea Plan. So that was the initial planning documents that were done in 2008 and 2009 for redevelopment of the Quarry area. Then I'm going to discuss the plan district. So those are the regulatory requirements that were adopted into the development code to implement the plan. I'm going to go over the developer proposed HQ master plan. So this is the Fisher's Quarry area. The developer's chosen to name it the HQ master plan. I'll go over the approval process. And then, as was discussed, I'll reserve the remaining of our time for questions, comments, and discussion. Next slide, please. So the site is located generally west of 192nd Avenue and north of State Route 14. It's 99 acres and it's a former quarry. And the zoning of the property is RGX, which is a Riverview Gateway zoning. That was a special zoning that was established to implement the sub-area plan. And just to note as well, just to the east of that, and generally east of 192nd, is what was termed the Washdock Quarry area that became Columbia Palisades, and they went through a master plan that was approved in 2016. And as you can see out there, that is now being developed at this time. So now we're looking at this area of the Fisher's Quarry for master plan approval. Next slide, please. So this is an air photo that was in the sub-area planning document. So this is from that time period, 2008, 2009. And so it just identifies the two areas that became the RGX zone based on the sub-area plan. So again, Fisher's Quarry area to the left of the screen, Washdock Quarry area, that was the Columbia Palisades. Next slide, please. So going back to 2008 and 2009, there were two documents that were adopted by council, and that included the Riverview Gateway Sub-Area Plan. That was a document that had the vision for the development of the area, as well as planning maps and graphs that went into that. There was also substantial public involvement that went into that plan. And then a separate document that was associated with that was the design guidelines to help implement the vision of the plan. Next slide, please. So the general concepts that the vision of the plan presented included to develop a dynamic mix of urban uses, build on river views and quarry topography as a unique site amenity, a connection of a network of attractive parks, open space and trails, efficient multimodal circulation system, encourage low impact development techniques, and to protect the Columbia River shoreline. Next slide, please. So this is the planning concept map from the 2009 sub-area plan. So I'll just kind of walk through what the initial concept was for development of this area. So again, looking at this map, generally east of 192nd is the Columbia Palisades development. Down at the base of the quarry, there's a mixed use development concept. And then above, as you can see building out there now, are single family homes and some townhouses that were up on top of the quarry bluff on that side. And then the Fisher's Quarry development, the proposed Vancouver HQ project, generally west of 192nd. So again, in the central area was a mixed use core. In the north end, multifamily development, kind of stretching out to the west, office and light industrial uses, and then a buffer that was extending along the north end of the kind of the quarry wall that would remain with the development. And then interconnected pathways and some park uses throughout the development. Okay, next slide, please. This is just a generalized map that was from the sub-area plan. So again, in the central area around 192nd is the mixed use core, the single family at Columbia Palisades, the multifamily development shown at the north end, and then the light industrial uses stretching out to the west side of the master plan or sub-area plan. Next slide, please. So now we've kind of gone through the sub-area plan, the visioning document that was done in 2008, 2009. Now I'm going to talk about the regulatory requirements that are been placed in the code. So those come from the plan district. Those are in the development code, section 2680, and provides how to implement the sub-area plan. So these are the plan district, the Riverview Gateway plan district requirements. So this is the map from the development code. Again, dividing these two areas, the Washtenaw Quarry, Columbia Palisades, the Fisher's Quarry area. This is the Vancouver HQ, the proposal before us. And then there's some different regulations that apply to each of these areas. And then each area is required to have a master plan approved prior to moving forward with development. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, there's a few regulatory or metrics that are required in the code. And the first is the land use allocation. So this is based on site area. So the first one is multifamily residential. It talks about a maximum of 40% of the land area. That's the developable land area. The quarry has a lot of slopes and things that can't be developed, but the developable area, maximum of 40%. And then it talks about non-office commercial uses, generally retail type uses. Those are also a maximum of 35% of, I'm talking land area, of the land area. And then it has a minimum, and it's specified office and or light industrial uses. So it has a minimum of 30%. And then parks and open spaces also have a minimum of 7%. And when we're talking about the land uses, the code's a little bit confusing. But if you have a mixed use building, it talks about one full floor. So we'll talk about their master plan here in a moment, but for instance, they're in the center of the project, they have one full floor of retail, and then they have above floor multifamily. And so that land use allocation is then assigned to the non-office commercial. So it doesn't, since there's a maximum of standalone multifamily, they can put more multifamily in, but they have to have one full floor of another use. And it could be office use as well, because that's not limited. So just kind of to help understand that concept. Next slide, please. The other couple of regulatory requirements are 10% of all buildings in the Fisher's Quarry area need to be mixed use with 2 or more uses. There's a minimum floor area of 0.5 to 1. And then the RGX zone has a maximum height of 75 feet. Next slide, please. So those are just at the beginning of the code, those are the basic regulatory requirements, the land use allocation, the mixing, the minimum FAR. And then the other requirement is to go through the master planning process. And so that's a type 4 process in the code. Because the site is over 25 acres, it goes to the Planning Commission first for public hearing. Then the Planning Commission makes recommendation to the City Council, who will make the final approval in this case. And then just to summarize the approval criteria of the master plan, very simply, the master plan needs to be consistent with the sub-area plan document, and it needs to achieve the master plan objectives. Next slide, please. So these are what were stated as the master plan objectives in the code from the plan district, of course, taken from the sub-area plan. And these objectives are to capitalize on the unique topography and view potential, favor urban rather than suburban uses, provide for quality development that creates a sense of place, sustainable building and low impact development techniques, reduce off-site impacts, noise, glare, traffic, ensure those are minimized, meet the standards of the Vancouver Comprehensive Parks, Recreation, and Natural Areas Plan. And there was also a provision to provide 10% of the units need to be affordable to moderate income levels. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about the developers proposing the Vancouver HQ master plan. So this is what they've submitted for review that will be coming before the Planning Commission and public hearing. So I'm just going to walk through this to get a sense of their proposal. There are a few things that are different from the sub-area plan map that I had previously showed. I'll kind of walk through some of those proposed or what's proposed in the master plan. So as you look at the center part of the development, there's going to be, I guess, first of all, the developer will, provide the road infrastructure. So HQ Drive will extend through, and then Brady Road will extend through east to west, and then there'll be a loop road at the north. And then there'll be a main street coming north-south. Then off that main street, there'll be 7-story buildings proposed. They'll have structured parking, ground floor commercial, and then 6 stories of upper floor apartments. Building 1 is proposed as an ice arena, and then there'll be a civic plaza that will kind of provide a center area for that main street area. Then surrounding that will be lower story buildings, office, industrial, and those will stretch out towards the west end of the site. There'll be, right now there's a proposed public park of 6.5 acres at the south central area of the site. Going towards the north end of the property, there's going to be multifamily residential at 5 floors. And just a few different things that were shown in the master plan that are amendments. One is the developer has proposed an apartment building that's not on the quarry floor, but is up in the north quadrant of the development, and that's shown. There was a buffer shown originally on the master plan. There was a public trail that was shown up on top of the bluff that went past the homes on the north end of the property, and the Parks Department walked the site with the developer and decided that wasn't going to be a workable solution due to the topography constraints and the privacy constraints of the homes that were along there. So the developer has placed the trail at the base of the quarry area. The other change is there was, under the master plan, there was a 2 to 3 acre private park that was proposed at the multifamily. And in discussions with the Parks Department and wanting to find a way to get more park space in East Vancouver, they worked with the developer to lay out a 6.5 acre public park that, again, is to the south end. And then just a other thing of note is next to the park, there's the public trail will go through a tunnel that goes through or below Highway 14. And then there's a road that goes down to Evergreen. This has traditionally been used as a haul road for the quarry, and that would be eventually converted into a pedestrian and bicycle pathway that would lead into the development, and then down to Evergreen, where eventually the Lewis and Clark Trail would extend and connect in. Next slide, please. So this is a map that the developer provided just of building heights to give a sense of scale. So the dark blue in the middle where the Main Street is and the center mixed use area, those are 7-story buildings. And on the north end, again, the multifamily is 5 stories. And then we have surrounding that 2 to 3 story buildings and then 1-story buildings kind of stretching out. So the main density of the projects in the center area, and then the scale of the project kind of works its way down. And then in the north area, there are 5-story buildings for the multifamily. Next slide, please. This is a perspective that the developer provided. So this one is looking directly east. So the blue canopy would be where the ice skating rink would be, and then the plaza area. So then you can see the ground floor commercial buildings, the angled parking proposed for Main Street, and then the upper story apartments above the commercial area. Next slide, please. And then this is another perspective kind of down at ground level at the plaza, looking directly east towards the ice rink to give you a sense of the scale of the plaza and central gathering area for the development. Okay, next slide, please. So I talked earlier about the land use allocations and try to just kind of get this, just to get a sense of the acreages of the development and what's being proposed. So again, it's based on the developable area of land. So just below the line, the developable area of the land is 65.72 acres. And then the uses above that as they work their way down: non-office commercial, office, light industrial, multifamily, usable open space. You can see the acreages and the percentages of those that are taking up the developable land that the code's based on. And then you can see there's quite a bit of other space on the development that isn't considered developable as land uses. So that comes out to 98.55 acres, and those include the buffer, the quarry wall, some storm drainage, a pump station for sanitary sewer, and then the dedicated right-of-ways needing to serve the development. Next slide, please. So this is graphically showing how they're assigning those uses to the development. So again, as I talked about a mixed-use project, so in the center core, the red areas, those are assigned to non-office commercial because 1 full floor of that development will be non-office commercial, even though 6 stories above will be apartments. So they'll assign that use allocation to commercial or non-office commercial. So that's the red. The blue will be the light industrial and office. The kind of off brown towards the north area, those will be assigned to the multifamily. And then the green is their code required parks and usable open space. So that includes the 6.5 acre public park that's shown, the Civic Plaza, that's about 30,000 square feet in the center Main Street. There's also a strip of land that they're proposing to include, and that's about 3/4 of an acre. They're proposing a dog park, benches, walking areas, some interpretive signage and other things in that location. So that's how they're allocating the uses. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to just go into the parks and open space a little bit more to make sure the Planning Commission understands the proposal and what the code requires. So again, they are required to do 7% of the developable land, which we kind of walk through, needs to be parks and usable open space. So again, that includes parks and usable open areas. It excludes planned public roads, buffers, or regional drainage facilities. These areas have to be usable. They have to be parkland. So they need to meet the Vancouver Comprehensive Parks, Recreation, and Natural Areas Plan. And so kind of going back to that sub-area map from 2009, there was 6.3 acres that were shown as the usable parks and open space in the Fisher's Quarry area, now Vancouver HQ. And the sub-area plan also showed a 2 to 3 acre private park up near the multifamily and a 10,000 square foot plaza. So they're proposing a 6.5 acre public park now and about 30,000 square foot public plaza at the center area. Next slide, please. So this is the windowed in area of the public park to kind of show a little bit more detail of the programming for that park. So there's a rock outcropping, a basalt rock outcropping. It's got some oak trees on it. There's going to be some walking trails, some passive use of that. The kind of pinkish area would be an amphitheater, a playground, an open play area, and then a sport court. So that's kind of the initial idea of the programming of the park. And again, this is kind of a breakdown. Again, they're 7% required. They're proposing 7.98 acres, and that's 12.14%. And the park is a 6.5 acre park site. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is showing, just to get an idea what their phasing is. So what they're proposing to do, so the unshaded roads, they're proposing to put those in first. So the HQ Drive, the extension of Brady Road, the Main Street, the center area would be built first. And then the shaded area is the loop road for the multifamily that would also be installed first. They're also talking about their proposed lot 30, that's the building on top of the Quarry Bluff, would also be installed first as part of their phasing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just to walk the Planning Commission through the what the applicants requested and what approvals they're requesting. So the first is the Type 4 Master Plan. Again, that requires it goes through the Planning Commission for recommendation to City Council. They're also proposing some revisions to the design guidelines. So I talked about that separate document that was done in 2008 that's to guide development. They wanted to tailor that some, so they've provided a document that outlines where they want to adjust those guidelines to better fit with their concept. They're also proposing a 30-lot subdivision. That would typically go to the hearings examiner, but since they've submitted that with their preliminary subdivision plat with the master plan, that will also go to the Planning Commission for approval. And that would just divide the site into 30 lots so they can sell certain buildings and areas of the site off. Once it's divided, it also establishes the public right-of-way and allows the streets to be installed. And then the other request is a zoning text amendment, and they've asked staff for a couple of amendments to the code. And these are under section 430 under mixed and commercial uses. So that's where the permitted and conditional uses for the RGX sub-area planning zoning are contained. So the table of permitted and conditional uses. And this really refers to their office and industrial uses. So they've requested that industrial services are changed from a conditional to a permitted use. And industrial services are generally small, like HVAC and contracting businesses and things like that. And I think they're asking for more flexibility on this. Staff has asked the applicant to provide us more information. We're not going to support just a blanket change from conditional to permitted, but we think maybe there are some uses within there if they want to call those out that would be consistent with the sub-area plan, that we would be able to entertain, maybe adjusting some of the uses for the, tailoring that a little bit more. And then the other request is under manufacturing and production. There's a footnote in that table, and it limits manufacturing and production to the area that's italicized there. So it's really limiting it to more research and development. I think it wanted it. The sub-area plan was looking at more employment intensive office and related type tech and other uses of that nature. So again, I think it's from staff's perspective, we've asked the applicant to elaborate a little bit. We don't think we want to eliminate the footnote, but maybe there are some areas that we could provide a little bit more flexibility for them and still provide uses that were consistent with the sub-area plan. So those are the three main approval requests. Next slide, please. So the one issue that's been of concern for the neighbors, the developer held an online neighborhood meeting a couple weeks ago, and there were several comments on this particular part of the proposal. I know there were several letters that have been received from the public that have had concerns, and the primary concerns that we've heard from the public are in regards to what's termed lot 30. So this is a lot that would be part of the subdivision. So that's why the number 30 is on it. It's a proposed 5-story multifamily building that's on top of the slope. And then it has, I think, approximately 175 parking spots to support that. And so there's been concerns about visual impacts and noise impacts and those sort of things. There's also been concerns expressed about access to Southeast 41st Drive. And just one other thing as well, the city actually owns the property that's between this development and 41st Drive. So the city would have to sell the developer that property in order to access the development. And the city staff has looked into this, and it is however, it is excess property. So those things would need to be worked out in order to move forward. And again, as was shown on the sub-area plan, it was shown as a buffer on the sub-area plan. So the RGX zone does allow this type of use, but there are concerns in its consistency with the sub-area plan. And there was also a work session with council where they had expressed some concerns under that for that reason as well. So concerns definitely have been expressed with development of lot 30. So wanted to bring that to the Planning Commission's attention. Next slide, please. So just a summary as I conclude here, just some remaining issues since we're at work session. The applicant has submitted their master plan, and we're still working through some issues with the applicant. So again, as was discussed, the lot 30 concerns, the zoning text amendments, which I talked about, we want some more detail about, maybe we'd be more willing to be flexible on some of those permitted and conditional uses, but want those to be consistent with the sub-area plan. The developers talked about using smart technology, and that's something that we support. So there's all different ways you can use smart technology. The developers indicated that they're working with a consultant, so they're going to have more of a specific metrics on what this could be. They've described that as being able to use a smartphone to find parking, or to reserve space in a restaurant, or there's lots of new technology about how things can be run with the energy grid or other things. So we'll wait to see what they provide us on that. There's no specific code requirement for that. One of the goals of the master plan or the sub-area plan is to provide for sustainable development. So we're also asking for more clarification from the developer on what sustainable elements they'll provide, including any green type of certifications they wish to pursue. Talked about the 6.5 acre public park. So they're working through the Parks Department right now on a letter of intent on the potential purchase of that land. So that's still being worked out. And then the last kind of main issue is as the developers work through the amount of development they're proposing, there's been a downstream deficiency identified within the sanitary sewer system. So they've been working closely with our public works folks to do the calculations on that, including the pump station. And so that's kind of been an ongoing conversation. I think they're getting closer to understanding what those deficiencies may be, and then they can figure out how to address those. Next slide, please. So the next steps is we'll do a second Planning Commission workshop, and that's tentatively scheduled for November 9th. So if there's following up the questions, we can come back for another work session. And then the hearing is tentatively scheduled for, the Planning Commission hearing is tentatively scheduled for December 14th. And then following that, there'll be additional workshops with council, as well as council public hearings to adopt an ordinance to approve the project. And just to note, Rebecca had said at the beginning that this is just a master plan under the plan district, and the applicant's requesting approval under the code and criteria. They have not asked for a development agreement, and they have not requested any map changes other than the text amendments that I discussed earlier is what they would like to amend the development code for those permitted and conditional uses. So with that concludes my presentation. So I'm here for questions. There's also representatives from the applicant's team here that could also answer questions Planning Commission has.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll go around and ask each of you for your questions. I think it's important this evening we get out our questions and also the expectations we have for what questions need to be asked before we have our second workshop. So Commissioner Schauer.
Thank you. This is a Herculean amount of work. First I would say I appreciate the thoroughness of the information you've been given. There's a lot of information here. And
Commissioner Schauer, would you speak up, please? Louder.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
No one's ever accused me of not being able to hear me, so I appreciate the moment. I would say I got a few questions and concerns. I think Keith did a good job describing the differences between the sub-area plan and the proposed plan. There are areas here which I think are a little bit of a flashpoint. For example, lot 30. I'll disclose it's been 14 years, but I used to live in the neighborhood to the north, so I'm very intimately familiar with the proximity of this work and the location. And the quarry itself for a long time was a real obstacle to peace and quiet, so this could be something significantly improved. The three areas I've got concern are lot 30. I'm not so concerned with where it's located, but the neighbors adjacent, it's not unreasonable to think they would have had an open space buffer, and the map of the scale I'm looking at doesn't really convey any kind of landscape buffer to the half a dozen homes to the west. Not that it can't be mitigated. I don't know if there's a detail we can see, or maybe it's in here and I haven't seen it. What does that elevation look like between the parking lot and the houses? And what does the fence and landscape look like there? An expectation of a buffer, now no buffer. I have really no concern initially about the proximity to 41st Avenue, as long as the impacts to the road can be traffic and other things can be mitigated. It seems like the highest impact is directly to those few homes to the west. So I think it's a great idea to maximize the view. I just think it's probably an unreasonable thing for the neighbors who live there to have their expectations changed. A second issue is in the CUP, restriction to things that would not be CUP. I've seen lots of things where we'd say, let's make a school no longer a CUP in a master plan, or let's make a daycare or some other kinds of activities which are very clear and obvious, but a blanket for no CUP seems bold. I think it could work, but as I look at the map, we're talking about all the light industrial areas. There are some light industrial areas which are directly adjacent to the adjoining neighborhoods, and perhaps maybe the release of the CUP restriction isn't universal across all of the light industrial. I'm thinking forward to a sort of a compromise where the stuff that's not directly adjacent to residential could maybe have the waiver, and the things that are directly adjacent, where they have more impact to neighbors, where they could participate in the CUP process. My curiosity is it an all or none? Or is there sort of a hybrid where we have the most adjacent stuff, have a little more oversight, or commit to more detail as you suggest? And let's see, lastly, I'd be really concerned about the framework of our future deliberations. Is it one decision between a master plan and a subdivision, or is there a master plan decision and a subdivision decision? The criteria are probably somewhat different for a land division action and a master plan approval. And I'm looking for staff to give me guidance as to what is clear and more in the criteria we discussed, right? There can be criteria that are related to the master plan but unrelated to the subdivision and vice versa. So helping me understand that will help in how I think, I've said before, I think we should stay in our lane about the criteria and the code that we're given. And since there's probably different criteria for the subdivision and the master plan, if we could characterize perhaps our discussions or your presentation in the future around those two separate applications. I know they're tied for the developer, but it'll really help us stick to where I think we need to be. And I think, the last I'd say is the PED connection. That has, I would express some extreme excitement for this part of town, having lived here almost 30 years. A lack of a pedestrian connection to Evergreen Boulevard from this area has been substantial. There's actually some sort of impromptu connections which get up there, which are not good. So that Hall Road down below will be a significant improvement. I know you went right over it, but I think that's to me one of the highlights, along with that 6.5 acre park with the rock outcropping not coming down. Those are two big, strong elements. I'm really enthused and I would express my appreciation to the applicant team. But those are my quick coverage. I don't know if it's quick or not. Those are my initial concerns and questions. But I'm generally excited for the project to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Pyle?
Hi, yeah, so I just have a few questions, a couple maybe which the applicant can answer a little bit later, and a couple for staff. I guess my first comment is just that the scale of this project is massive, and in the density it looks to have been maximized, and I would, staff or the applicant could answer it, has the density been maximized on this site? Not only down in the Quarry area, but kind of echoing Commissioner Shower's comment about lot 30, is that I think that's a five-story building up there. So just wondering, has the density been maximized, or is there flexibility in all of that? I noticed that there was the 10% of units targeting to be affordable. Is there any metrics around that? Do we have any comments from the applicant about their plan for meeting that goal? And then what's the target AMI for that 10% of units to be affordable? On the park, yeah, very exciting about the park. Look forward to hearing from park staff on that the design for that park, and it's currently designed is just mostly open space with some amenities that meets the needs of the area. I believe that there had been a study done about what sort of park needs as far as space and amenities they were looking for on the east side of town. I noticed one detail regarding right-of-way encroachment, and I'm not sure if there's any variances or any code amendments being asked for there, but I was just hoping to get a little bit more detail on it's on master plan page 15. If we have any, if we need to be looking closely at that right-of-way encroachment as a part of our deliberations. And then finally, I think the big concern that I have is, very clear that the master plan goals, the sub-area plan goals laid out that, offsite impacts were to be minimized. That had to do with light pollution, traffic, and I believe lot 30 is in some conflict with that as it's currently designed. And then finally, I would definitely want to hear that the transportation system, the sanitary sewer system, that all of that infrastructure is capable of handling this scale of development, as I believe that was also a kind of sub-area plan goal stated. So that would need to be resolved before any decision was made on my end. That's all I have.
Okay. Continue to go around, and after we hear from the commissioners on their questions, I'll give you a chance to make some comments, Keith. Commissioner Atkins?
Yes, thank you. I echo some of the same comments that Commissioner Schauer and Zach made, Commissioner Pyle made. I have some of the same questions. What is AMI? I think the idea of a blanket changing of the industrial might not be the right solution. Maybe there's a more elegant way to do that where you're abutting the existing neighborhoods versus where you're not. I think that was a good point Commissioner Schauer made. The question I had, and this is to staff, walk me through again what the requirements were, just because is your interpretation that, again, if you've got a 6-story building and you put 10,000 square feet of retail on the floor, but you have 170,000 square feet of residential above it, that it still counts as a commercial building? Did I follow that right? That seems like a very broad interpretation. Now, I'm not opposed to it because we need housing, but is there any legal basis for that kind of? I've never heard of that kind of interpretation. So it seems to me this is a change from the sub-area plan, and that's okay. But I have a tough time wrapping my head around, because if you got a 180,000 square foot building and you put 10,000 square feet of retail on the ground floor, that it suddenly becomes a commercial building. I mean, let's call it what it is. It's a residential building, and they're building substantially more residential. To me, this screams that it needs a development agreement to get over this hurdle, but that's where I'm stuck. I just don't see, it's not that I don't like it. I just don't see it consistent with the sub-area plan.
Okay. Any other questions?
So that's my only.
Okay. Commissioner Schulte?
Yes, Keith, could you speak to the east side of 192nd? I think it's called the Quarry area, but you mainly focused on the west side. Could you talk about the east side of it too?
Okay. Any other questions? And then I'll let Keith respond.
I do have one, and that, again, we're back on traffic. 192nd's getting very, very busy. It seems like every time I'm out there, there's more traffic, lots of new development on the north end. And all that's north-south traffic. Now we're putting a lot of east-west traffic on down here, down near 192nd. And how's that all going to work from a traffic flow perspective?
Okay. I want to add my questions, and then I'll have you make some comments, Keith, to some of the questions that have been raised, and maybe some you'll come back to in our second workshop. I wonder, is 41st seen as a residential street, or is it to be an arterial at some point? I also wonder about school bus traffic, through the community and from the outside. Is that mainly from off 192nd, or is that from 34th Street? I have a concern about changing the conditional use to just outright permitted. I think a couple of the commissioners have expressed that thought too. The sustainability elements that you described, as council moves forward with the climate action plan, I hope that we're expecting the developer to be agile and meet those as the council puts those in place, those new expectations. And also the necessary infrastructure for the sewer capacity. Lot 30 concerns me a great deal, because in driving through that community, it's hard to see how that many cars flow into that community very easily. So traffic mitigation is going to be really important. And I don't know if there's been any discussion about other ways to create exit from that multifamily. So those are my concerns. Go ahead, Keith.
Okay, thank you. I'll just try to summarize a few of the points that were made, and then we'll try to return with answers to your questions at the next work session. So I think the first one I want to tackle was the comments I heard in regards to the density. So it's a confusing section of code. So the way that the implementation regulations attempted to, for one, they wanted to encourage mixed use. They wanted to put certain limits on types of uses and limits and unlimits on other uses. And so what they didn't want was to have only multifamily. So the way that the code is structured is they said, okay, but we also want to encourage office. So we don't want to put a limit on the amount of office space. So you can do as much office as you can within the confines of the building height and the constraints of the site and the other uses that you have to do. And I'm really trying to explain this because the code's a little confusing and how it's worded, but what it says is 40% of the site can be multifamily. So that's what they did. They laid out the 40% at the north end. So there's no mixed use there. Then within the mixed use center, it says you can do 35% non-office commercial. And then the code specifically says that you assign the land area, the use allocation to any use in that building that's one full floor. That's what the code says. So they can assign that to one, if they have one full floor of retail, they can assign that land allocation to that site, to that use. It's not that the whole building is commercial, it's that then they can put a mixed use on top of that, and that can go up to the 75 feet. That's the maximum height. And then they can add those units. There's no maximum amount of units in this zoning district. There's just the constraints on the land allocation, and then the requirement to get a master plan, and then they have to say how many units they're putting in, how much square footage, and then that's what we approve, and then they go through the phasing and develop it out. So hopefully I'm explaining that. So I could try to bring up those graphics again and try to walk through it, but it's essentially the use allocation, and then it's one full floor, and that's how you assign that use. It's how the code was written in order to encourage mixed uses.
I understand. So let me ask a clarifying
Sure.
question, since you're responding to my point,
Yeah.
Commissioner Atkins.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So when you say one full floor of retail or commercial, that implies to me that there would be no ancillary residential use. I mean, how do you define one full floor? Because you're going to have a lobby at the floor that's probably going to support the residential. You're going to have mechanical at the floor that's going to support the residential. So because you have 5,000 square feet of residential or retail on the ground floor, I still have a tough time understanding how that becomes a commercial site.
So, Mr. Jones, before you respond,
Anyway, okay.
Yeah, before you respond, we've got about 10 more minutes for this item.
Okay. Yep.
And I think the point that Commissioner Atkins has raised bears further discussion for the next workshop.
Gotcha.
So would you respond just kind of generally to some of the questions raised by other commissioners?
Sure. So I think there were some good points made on the conditional use. We'll ask the applicant to give us more information. We'll try to tailor that a little bit more based on the comments, particularly what impacts there could be to residences, kind of see if there's a way that we can come to some compromise on allowing a little more flexibility that's still consistent with the sub-area plan. There was the comment about the criteria for the subdivision. I'll try to lay that out a little bit more in the next meeting on what exactly the approval criteria will be for the planning commission. There were comments about traffic. The applicant has submitted a traffic impact study that's being reviewed by Transportation Department. We'll have transportation available to further discuss any concerns the Planning Commission has in regards to traffic impacts. What else did I hear? The AMI used for the affordable housing, that refers to the RCW for multifamily tax exemption. I believe it does apply still to the Portland metro region. We have been in discussion with them to see if there's some ways we can get some additional affordable housing, but the code is 10% and is based on that. I'll make sure that we highlight that at the next work session. Let's see what else did we have here. I know there's definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner Schulte. Commissioner Schulte had two questions. One was you talked about, and help me out here, Steve. You were asking to talk more about the west side or the east side.
No, about the east side. Again, most
Yep.
of the focus so far was the west side. I'd like to hear what's going on the east side.
Sure. So the Columbia Palisades development, so that master plan was approved in 2016, and then they built out the infrastructure for that. And so far, the Vancouver Clinic is the first commercial development that's happened out there at the base of the quarry on that side. So none of the other commercial is developed quite yet. The single family residential is being built out. There's a multifamily apartment building kind of towards the south end. It's up a little higher on the bluff. That's been approved and that's being developed. And there's some townhouses that are to this kind of south area on top of the bluff. Those are mostly constructed and getting close to occupancy. So that's where that's at. There's been some pre-app requests and other some activity discussions about development of the other commercial areas, but so far the Vancouver Clinic is the only commercial development that's occurred in that master plan.
And Steve, so, this is Rebecca. Maybe I can just clarify a little bit here. The sub-area plan anticipated two master plans, one for the Washtenaw Quarry and one for the Fisher's Quarry. The Washtenaw Quarry master plan has already been approved. It came through Planning Commission and was approved by City Council several years ago, and development is underway, and it's not part of the review that's before you tonight.
So where's the city boundary on 192nd?
If you want to back up on the slides, we can look at those. Let's see here. Keep going.
Yeah, just let me know how far you want me to go back.
Yeah, keep going.
Maybe slide 4.
Yeah. This I guess this gives a sense here. You can see this is the Fisher's Quarry is the boundary of this Vancouver HQ master plan. And then the Wisdot Quarry is called Columbia Palisades. So that's the boundary. Some of the lots along the west end are included in that master plan. So it's hard to say exactly what the boundary is there, but there's a couple of lots that are part of Columbia Palisades, and then we get into the Fisher's Quarry development. That's
yeah, I was thinking of the city of Vancouver boundary, and I think I can see the city of Vancouver. So it goes across 192nd, the city boundary.
It does. You can see, yes, city of Camas is at the other, yes, yeah.
So I think you've heard questions from us, particularly about traffic and density and sustainability. So do you think you have a good idea of what you need to bring back to us? And I'm going to encourage the commissioners who weren't here this evening to email questions so we get those folded into the next workshop. And if any of the commissioners on the line tonight want to submit more questions too, that would be good. Is that right, Mr. Jones? We can email.
That works. Yep, that works.
So you said the applicant is present. Does the applicant want to make any comments at all this evening or defer till next time?
Scott, are you here? Do you want to make any comments?
Yes, hold on real quick. First of all, I just want to say thank you real quickly. I'm Scott Brantley, Senior Project Manager for Hurley Development. I do want the Planning Commission to know that Hurley Development is a local development company will redo all our work in in Clark County in the city of Vancouver. We're taking great pride in this HQ development. We take great ownership. This is our neighborhood. This is an outside development. We have been working carefully and closely with staff and with our design team from OTAC and Mackenzie, our traffic engineer. And so we are trying to be as transparent and open and honest through this process. And we've been working diligently with the neighborhood associations to the north and west with doing public outreach meetings and addressing their concerns as they come up. I do want you guys to know that on lot 30, that the RGX was created in 2009. We're the owners of this project as of 2021 and have a better understanding of the developable area. The work that's going on there now, which has caused some of the confusion, is Cadman is in a reclamation of this site, which is a Department of Natural Resources reclamation plan. That berm up on lot 30 was placed up there as part of the Quarry development plan. The work we have now, Cadman has now had to take that berm back down to reclaim it to what it was prehistorical to the reclamation. So there's been some confusion because lot 30 has now been flattened by about 45 feet, that it is Hurley Development that is in there doing development work, and it has caused some concerns with the neighbors that we are just going to move forward with a apartment complex and put a parking lot up there. We do have sections of this and sections of the building and our buffer line, and we do want to arrive at a solution, a reasonable solutions with the neighborhood. And we are looking into other alternatives for this, such as senior living up on this top of the hill that would reduce traffic and trips and parking needs. So we are open to other development opportunities up here, but as the owner of this property, this is a bluff with a view corridor. Part of the master plan is to offer views, and this is a piece of real estate that could add great value to the quarry and to the development. So we plan on continually to work with the neighborhood associations and the leads and be transparent, hoping to arrive at a solution that the Planning Commission, City Council, and our community can come together and agree upon. Like you have seen in your packages, there's been a great deal of work that has been done by our design team over the last 6 months. The economics, I encourage you guys to go to our website that has all the information on this project and look at the economic benefits of this project. We do, there's a process in place, but we want to be on the ground putting in road infrastructure in 18 months. That's something that we take great pride in. We want to work closely with the city officials and the commission. But we want to get moving and get jobs here and get the development going. So I encourage you, we're a transparent company. It's all about bringing families together and creating a life work and recreate a place where our community can come together and be proud of. We're going a great deal of exercises to bring in a smart component and make this a viable city that we could be, where we can put Vancouver on the map as a leading industry for, we're going to aim for that net neutrality of 2040 out here. So we're looking into energy savings and grid systems and how we can make our buildings smart, meaning that you have controls of your electrical usage and your blinds and security and the things that people are looking for in their residential living. So we've done a very intensive traffic study. It's about 500 pages long. We understand the traffic components of this. We're adding in 2 intersections, widening parts of 192nd for turn lanes, and we're creating a thorough street through this. We also have a subdivision on the very west end outside of this Fisher Quarry that goes to hearing October 19th, which ties in our HQ drive to the north on the west end of this project. So I'm hoping that we can continue to have this open dialogue and move forward. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and we look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you. We appreciate your outreach to the community, and not only transparency, but also creative problem solving. I think you've probably figured out we're kind of a tough-minded group here, so we hold people to a high standard. So thank you, and thank you, Keith. We're ready for our next item, Rebecca.
Yeah, so while Julie is bringing it up, I will just do a quick introduction. So what is before you tonight is the Evergreen and Grand Commercial Corridor Strategy. You all have seen this a few times before as it's developed over the last 18 months or so. We've recently released, as is our process, a public comment draft of the strategy. And we're really bringing this back to the Planning Commission, both to kind of remind you of where we're at in advance of coming forward to a public hearing, as well as to provide an opportunity for the public in this forum to provide comment. There will be other opportunities for the public to provide comment as well. I will say nothing has changed significantly since your last review. There are some items that have a little more detail on them that Brian will walk through with you, but this is largely consistent with what you have previously seen. In particular, the overall sort of framework for the boulevard or for the roadways, how we'll treat different anchor points and the type of sort of uses we're expecting or like aiming to see in different areas. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian Snodgrass, Principal Planner, who you all know, and he can walk you through it. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, commissioners. We've got it's a relatively long PowerPoint presentation just because we wanted to make sure to cover the ground, but you have seen many of this information, in fact, some of the exact slides before, so I'll try and move through it relatively quickly. As Rebecca mentioned, we would anticipate coming back before you in hopefully a reasonably not too long period of time with for land use hearings for approval of the strategy document. So with that, let's go to the first slide, please.
So Brian, you have 39 slides. So as you go through them, you can highlight anything that's new, or anything that's a new detail, bring extra attention to as we go.
I'll try to do that. Thanks. And so as mentioned, the strategy draft, which is a version of which we would anticipate bringing back for adoption hearings to the commission and to the council late this year or early next, has been out on our website for a couple of weeks. And we have an upcoming public meeting, informal public meeting on October 21st at 6 p.m., a virtual meeting, essentially to present the document, answer questions, relatively informal. We've had several meetings before, which I'll go through quickly. And we would anticipate bringing forward, assuming the document can be adopted either late this year or early next, then in the follow-up in spring of next year, bringing forward the actual zoning standards to implement the vision. Next slide, please. And so there's been quite a bit of work. As you know, with this commission, there was sort of an introductory memo in April of 2020. Then there were workshops of June that year, and then February this year. There's been a number of city council workshops, some of them involving the hearings involving the adoption of a moratorium and then lifting of it. And we most recently spoke with council at a workshop on September 20th this year. There's been 3 rounds of community open houses. The first began just before the onset of the pandemic. We've had a couple of rounds of virtual meetings, and we'll have our third then, as mentioned, October 21st. Next slide, please. And so this should be familiar. You've seen this slide before. It's the origin of the commercial corridor strategy, the broad goals of the strategy, and the corridors that at least were initially involved. The focus here is on Evergreen and Grand. The St. John's Couplet and 4th and Mill Plain may be addressed depending on resources as part of the comprehensive plan process coming up. Next slide, please. This is the study area itself. It hasn't changed since you've seen it before. You've seen this slide actually, which describes the area. It's a relatively, particularly on Evergreen, a fine-grained area with older buildings surrounded by a residential area. Next slide, please. And this, you've seen this as well at the very first open house. Just wanted to make sure we brought this back in front of you to get a sense of the public participation, what the input has been, and you of course have the memo as well. Concerns about some of the quality of both existing buildings, private buildings, as well as the public realm, desire for additional development to serve the neighborhood essentially. Next slide, please. And moving forward to the later in 2020 virtual open houses, there was broad agreement on overall visions, concerns about, again, about some of the building conditions, about traffic speeds, particularly on Grand, public safety issues, traffic and multimodal upgrades were talked about, as well as desires for community gathering places, a farmer's market, perhaps a small local grocery store. And concerns about parking, needing to have adequate parking and connections to other areas. Next slide, please. February, we heard many of the similar types of concerns with a little more detail to them. And at this point, these meetings involve bringing forward photos and so forth and graphics similar to what you've seen and will see tonight. There was support for improved streetscape and the look of many of the public realm. There was, again, throughout this process, we've heard sort of an emphasis where possible of trying to focus on locally serving businesses, and also concerns about affordability within the area, both residential affordability and commercial. Wanting to support a range of housing types as is appropriate on the corridor. And again, it's just worth emphasizing the plan itself, although it will influence the neighborhood, no doubt, and have some impacts, it is focusing on the corridors themselves. Concerns about higher density development being out of character, parking, and interest in the BRT hub at the northern end of the study area. Next slide, please. So these broad goals were established. You've seen this before in 5 different areas. I won't read through them. And those were part of the public process, I think, beginning in the August of 2020 community meetings. Next slide, please. And so this is the 3 concepts that we've talked about before. The purple area at the north is we're calling it the BRT hub, looking for transit accessible housing and supportive amenities there. The red is the bulk of Grand Boulevard. There, the emphasis is more on continued commercial uses. And in the orange, on Evergreen Boulevard, a mix. There's obviously quite a bit of commercial activity, small scale there, but we'll see in some of the later slides some of the recommendations, but opportunities for residential as well as commercial, and relaxing some of the mixed use standards are something that we've looked at and talked about in workshops before. Next slide, please. And so this highlights the Grand area on Grand. Again, focusing on commercial. Next slide, please. Notice the anchor site. Each of these areas have sort of one large anchor site. That is essentially the mini mall on the east side of Grand. Next slide, please. Some visuals that we've had I think both in the workshops before the Planning Commission, but also in the public meetings before, showing a potential shopping center site. Next slide. And visuals from other jurisdictions of what a vibrant area like this could look like. Next slide. The discussion of the public realm, some of those public realm improvements are going to, that's a longer focus. Some of the street issues will be focused into the transportation system plan update, but did want to provide just a general idea of what's envisioned. Next slide, please. Turning to the, again, primarily residential mixed-use corridor on Evergreen, but it also recognizing there is a good deal of commercial activity there as well. Slide. This identifies some of the area, and as you know, there's some more recent apartment development that has occurred on the south side of the street. There's an anchor site, which is the Crosby Lanes bowling, identified here. The Crosby Lanes bowling alley. There's been some interest in a mixed-use development at that site. Next slide, please. And again, some examples of what corridor fronting development at various scales could look like. Next slide. And more of that, a focus in on the existing uses, the anchor site, and potential forms of new development. Next slide. And so a discussion of the public realm as well as what that might look like. This is you should have seen this before in prior workshops. Next slide. And turning lastly to the BRT hub, the purple area at the intersection of Mill Plain and Grand. Next slide. And again, focusing in on the footprints of some of the existing uses. The anchor site, which is the Air Academy at the southeast corner of that intersection. Some visuals of what development in their area could potentially look like. Next slide. Discussion about the public realm with the BRT and the stations being the most important part of that, as well as the continued auto use on the roadways. Next slide. Turning more to the details, and here are the recommendations, and these aren't new. There is more detail to them at this point, and recognizing that at this stage it is for the strategy document. We did want to make sure that had some detail so that particularly as we brought it forward to the community, there was enough specificity so that even though the zoning code standards wouldn't fall until next spring, there would be some idea of what the parameters were. And so in this case, it would be a relaxing of the current ground floor commercial standards. Currently, the entire area has commercial zoning, which allows mixed use development, but requires non-residential uses on the first, typically commercial uses on the first floor. And so the recommendation here is in the purple areas to permit that, but only continue to require it in the red areas here. And there would be in place of that, there would still be what's called here active edge requirements that would still facilitate an interesting streetscape environment that might still facilitate pedestrian activity, but a relaxation of the need for commercial in all cases that currently exists in zoning. Next slide, please. Building heights, also another area of interest that some recommended modifications, and in this case, some areas. Right now, the entire area, again, zone commercial with a 50-foot building height. We would propose to modify that. Ultimately, the zoning standards would probably be expressed in feet as they are now, but to give a sort of a more clear view to the public of what's envisioned, it's expressed here in stories. And so in the orange area, right on the east side of the BRT hub, there it would be we would look to expand height limits, probably to about 65 feet, certainly enough to comfortably accommodate 5 stories. In the red, it would be a 4-story limit, which is generally in line with what a 50-foot current limit is. So effectively no change there. And in the violet areas, we'd be looking to keep the heights a little bit lower at 3 stories. Next slide, please. Parking, also some modifications envisioned here, and it's in the block at the bottom has the written standards that or general language that we think the zoning standards would eventually flow from, and that is for commercial uses that to require 1 space per 1,000 feet of floor area. For residential uses, multifamily residential in this case, to require 1 space per dwelling unit. The current city standards are as you know, are 1 space per dwelling unit for single family, but 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit of multifamily. I think staff has long, been of the opinion that probably doesn't make that much sense, given that you're not likely to see more trips per unit in multifamily than single family, certainly. So proposing to change that standard to 1 per multifamily dwelling unit here. And also to eliminate the minimum parking requirements for ground floor retail. to provide more flexibility there as well. Recognizing that if it's a ground floor retail, it will have an above floor component that is still subject to its parking requirement. And so some opportunity to trade off there. Next slide, please. Active edges, that concept I mentioned earlier, it's highlighted in the black of where that requirement would likely occur. There would be a requirement for front door access and transparency. And it would apply not just to commercial uses, but also to first floor residential as well. And there's a picture of what that might look like in practice. Next slide, please. And this is just a graphic also addressing the same issue and providing a little more detail. On a ground floor commercial, an active edge might be that a minimum of 75% be doors and windows, and that you would have to have front door access as well. Next slide. And these are examples of what a commercial active edge could look like in practice. These all should be things that you have seen before. The next slide, please. A little more detail on what a residential active edge would be. And again, front door access, as with the commercial, on ground floor, that at least half of the area in terms of surface area be comprised of doors and windows. Next slide, please. Examples of what that might look like. Next slide. So in terms of some, and this is a little bit new, some of these concepts were talked about in terms of your prior exposure to it. Some of these were talked about in general terms previously, but there's a little bit more detail here. Again, still though at the strategy level expressed in policy language, it would need then zoning code language to fully express all the details, and that again is anticipated following adoption of the strategy document probably next spring. And the moving through these, and these are described in a little more detail in the strategy document itself, which is on our website and has been up there a couple of weeks. The some prohibitions of uses, of new uses rather, that conflict with some of what's envisioned here and what we've been hearing from the community. Big box retail, motor vehicle repair, other auto uses, and self-storage and drive-through. But there are some of those uses in place, and we would want to make clear that those could be maintained. We would want to also adopt standards. In this case, the details need to be fleshed out, but to have those vacant and underutilized spaces that are there on the corridor be ultimately developed. Also produce development regulations that provide additional access inducements, enhancements to the BRT hub corridor, and allow for mixing, non-mixed use, housing types on smaller parcels where appropriate, and try and be flexible with non-conforming uses, such as small businesses and so forth. Next slide. And just continuing again, the summary, there's a little bit more detail in the strategy document, but again, these are meant to be at the policy rather than regulation level. Consider disincentivizing chains and capping commercial business sizes. Explore allowances for, food cart pods and other temporary uses. Create standards for ground floor residential to ensure street front activation and interest. Develop design guidelines and encourage streetscape improvements when properties redevelop. Next slide. Moving on, looking at programmatic implementation recommendations, trying to create a business district, extending the MFTE program, and trying to attract and retain neighborhood serving businesses, establishing a storefront improvement program, signage and placemaking program along Grand and the BRT hub, and identify opportunities to support local houseless communities, but also promote public safety. Next slide, please. Continuing with programmatic type recommendations, exploring strategies to maintain economic diversity, and really focusing on housing affordability. considering height bonuses in some cases in exchange for workforce housing and improving connectivity to nearby areas. And where possible, leveraging environmental remediation funding through brownfields. Next slide, please. And turning quickly to transportation recommendations, as I mentioned earlier, these would this is probably a longer time frame in terms of implementation, because a lot of this would be folded into the transportation system plan update. The overall idea is to create a safe, some of the same goals that have been expressed throughout the project, a safe, cohesive, walkable, multimodal environment, increase signage, increase integration with other infrastructure, demand management strategies, and access management will all play a role. Differentiating on the different types of how these might work in different portions of the sub area. Grand Boulevard, we've heard some concerns about speed limits, implement traffic calming, add on street parking, allow parking space alternatives as mentioned here. Next slide. And rounding out the list on Evergreen, updating the street standards, trying to widen the sidewalks where we can, and increasing the other provisions on the street. And particular enhanced pedestrian crossing at the V Street intersection. And lastly, turning to the Mill Plain Grand intersection, the BRT hub, design the area and the transportation infrastructure to facilitate multimodal access to transit. Next slide. And so in terms of next steps, what I mentioned, just to wrap up, we'll have the upcoming public meeting, the informal meeting on the 21st. Depending on what we hear there, we would anticipate hopefully coming back in relatively short order to the Planning Commission with for hearings for recommendations for adoption that then will be forwarded to the City Council. And then in 2022, after a potential adoption of the strategy document, to begin implementing that through bringing forward proposed zoning code changes, design guidelines, and whatever other near-term implementing measures are appropriate at that stage, and recognizing that some of the programmatic issues, particularly transportation, will be a longer proposition. Next slide. So I tried to move a little bit quickly through that. I appreciate there'll probably be some questions. I'll turn it back to the Planning Commission.
Okay, so we basically, as a Planning Commission, need to convey whether we're comfortable with the direction that the strategy is taking as we look toward a workshop.
If there's any, I know you've seen this before, but if there's any, large or small concerns or issues or additional recommendations that you want to bring forward, this would be a good time for it.
Okay, Commissioner Schulte.
Yes, I don't have any additional recommendations at this point in time, but I am curious about a question. I've never asked this before, but I have been curious about it for a while, and that's with respect to public property. I know you can come onto public property and spend city money to make improvements, but how do you work with property owners where you have to go on private property? To what extent are your hands tied working on private property to make these improvements?
There are some limits. I guess it all depends on what type of improvement you're talking about. I mean, if for instance, one of the recommendations was to have a storefront program, if there are funds for that, those kind of funds can be granted. I don't know if Rebecca or anyone else wants to jump in with any other examples, but I think it varies by the type of improvement that's being talked about.
Yeah, I would just echo that. It really depends on what type of improvement you mean. Go ahead.
And I guess the second question is, as you start talking with business owners and property owners, when you engage them, if you're trying to provide something for one business, do other businesses come forward and want the same thing? Is it common to hear, I'd like the same thing this development got or this property got?
So if you're talking about like a grant program, typically we would have an application process. So like for a storefront grant program, one, it would depend on the source of the funding, what the sort of eligibility requirements for that program would be. And typically we'd have an application process with a transparent sort of review and evaluation process. And then we'd select those that generally we don't have unlimited funds. So then we would select those that were awarded based on some set of measurable criteria. So we have not done a ton of storefront improvements in the city, at least since I've been here. When we have done it, typically we think very carefully about how we do it, including thinking about recording covenants that essentially limit the amount of rent increases that could be applied to that property over a certain amount of time, because typically a small business doesn't necessarily own their property. And when that's the case, we don't want to improve the property for the benefit of the business and then essentially have that business be displaced because the owner ups the rents. And so we have structured these things to address those sorts of concerns, if that's kind of what you're getting at.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. Commissioner Atkins?
I have no questions at this time. I like the direction the work is going. Brian, good work. Thank you.
Commissioner Pyle?
Brian, question is, so we're kind of moving forward with a strategy right now and recommending that. Can you just briefly summarize what we're recommending right now versus kind of the more detailed and implementation work that would be done in 2022? Because I think you went through the whole thing just now, and I want to make sure that I don't want to dive too far into the details if I don't need to.
So the document to be recommended fleshes all of this out, and it has many of the same graphics, in fact, that we have here on this presentation. So some of those are sort of the policies that then would lead to a regulation, particularly in the area of parking and height limits, where I suspect there will be most of the interest will be around there in terms of community interest. As well as the active edge standard. So there's a series of, we went through it just now in the presentation, of 4 or 5 policies that are clearly intended to lead to some sort of later development standard. But we wanted to provide enough clarity here to show where that was going. There's also the written, a series of written, which we just went through, of some of which lend themselves to later development standards, a lot of which are programmatic, either transportation or we just talked about some of the funding assistance issues. So some of those things will be articulated later on as well at the implementation stage. So does that answer your question, or?
I think it does. I just didn't, there's a lot of fun details in the development of all these regulations, and I don't want to dive too far into them, but there are a couple of comments on a few of those hot button items, parking, particularly with of any mixed use building or a multifamily building adjacent to the BRT. Is there existing opportunities, or is that parking or traffic demand management program, could that be applicable to kind of the BRT adjacent properties?
Yeah, certainly, yes. I mean, traffic demand management and parking were both issues that are flagged here in the recommendations for this project. There's also, in some of the prior discussions we've had about state housing requirements, there are the policies that we need to come forward, not policies, excuse me, zoning changes we need to come forward. There are requirements to essentially lower parking requirements near frequent transit, which the BRT hub would certainly qualify for. So there'll be other parallel to this. There will also be other changes to parking that would affect that area that we'll have to make.
Because it makes sense to me that, yeah, an apartment next to a BRT would require less parking than the bowling alley site, for example. The active edge graphic that you showed, I believe it showed the active edge wrapping all the way around the Crosley Lane site. And I just wanted to, could you expand a little bit on, is that all neighborhood right there, or is that more of a commercial frontage on the other side of the Crosley Lanes?
The abutting properties from Crosley are to the south, excuse me, to the north and west are, is that right? Yes, north and west are residential. There's an intervening street for each of those.
Gotcha. Okay. I could go either way on requiring that active edge being wrapped all the way around that property, given that it's a residential use. And then in your memo, you kind of distinguished, disincentivizing drive-throughs, and I think in your presentation you mentioned disincentivizing chains, and I think there is a little bit of a difference there, and any clarity you could provide?
Well, I think we heard the chains issue is one we heard at I think a couple junctures of the public discussion. In fact, there was a question at the city council of, well, what would that look like, and it might involve some sort of either encouragement or limit on size of uses. So it remains to be seen exactly how that would be tackled. The drive-through issue is obviously a more common one we've seen in other sub-area plans. There was some general concerns about traffic from the public, but I think this was one where staff thought that this would be an appropriate issue to explore here to make the area, particularly Evergreen, more pedestrian friendly and in some cases keep its existing level of pedestrian friendliness as the area develops.
This is Rebecca. If I can just weigh in here, I mean, this is an area where we see our community, or sorry, our general commercial code being probably too permissive about the areas where drive-throughs are allowed, given their impact on the pedestrian environment. And so one of the impetuses for this planning process was to think through the existing sort of permissive nature, especially on uses of our code, and limit them here in a way that, kind of enhances and builds upon the existing sort of fine-grained built environment and the existing, at least on Evergreen, pedestrian environment. So it's sort of one area where I think it's where it was really part of the original intent to kind of narrow that list of allowed uses, drive-throughs being one.
And then my last question is, again, just kind of on your figures for the residential active use frontage. Both of your examples, I believe, had stoops. Are you envisioning that being or is the staff thinking that would be a requirement, or that would just be permitted?
I think at this stage, those are shown as examples. That's something we'd have to flesh out, I guess, once we got to the zoning stage. But no, there hasn't been sort of a clear discussion at this point that yes, we would require stoops. That hasn't come up yet.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Commissioner Shower.
Thank you. I'll offset Commissioner Pyle, who want to stay high level, and I'll go detailed. Three things, Brian. I think this vision is great. I guess my filters, I was listening, are what are some of the impediments which might erode the vision being implemented? And they're twofold on parking. I think the evolution of what drive-through or curbside pickup, all that stuff has changed in the last 2 years. So the idea, I think that a new evolution of not drive-through in the future is going to be businesses allowing to have reserved spaces for curbside pickup or parking lot pickup, where restaurants can exist without a drive-through, but people can order and not have to go find a parking place, but have a space so they can come out and deliver food. And I think that might be something to consider. I know it's an evolving practice, but I think things have fundamentally changed, and some folks really like that practice. There's one idea. Second is these really activated pedestrian environments from curb face to store face. If we don't have a very aggressive plan about bike parking, and I say bike parking, but that's really an understatement, micro mobility issues, scooters, bikes, wheels, all the things that are evolving. I think personally, and maybe I'm not recommending, but this idea of committed on street, like converting a stall to a corral for those things and keeping them off the sidewalk, they can become such an impediment to business owners keeping doorways clear and pedestrians walking side by side versus having to draft each other, if you will, down the sidewalk. I think something about that could be really, that detail could get missed and create all kinds of impediments to the realization of this vision that you've shown. And then lastly, the setback issues, 0 to 0.5 feet. I am admittedly not familiar with the utility issues on this corridor, but private utilities, overhead power, telephone, that usually exists in the PUE or the public utility easement that's 3 to 6 feet behind the right of way. And if we force businesses under redevelopment to be up against the right of way, for example, 0 or 5, we wouldn't want to, I think, mandate that all the utilities get moved to accomplish that, because it could be so expensive that it would impede the development. So I don't have an answer. I'm just worried about that 0 to 5 foot setback. There becomes less real estate to put, for example, at-grade transformers or water meters or the relocate a fiber optic line. Yeah, we wouldn't want to create $1 million utility problem that would then delay the implementation. So maybe before we get too far on the setback issue, one language could be 5 feet back from the right of way or other public easements. That might be a sort of a band-aid solution, but having been forced to consult on some downtown redevelopment projects in a prior life, that utility detail, knowing what your specific area has in terms of, are there any big utility impediments, foreseeing that could really help give momentum or velocity to redevelopment, or frankly the opposite. So I'd be happy to talk about more detail offline, but that's a worry I have. I love the vision where you're headed. I'm just thinking there's things we could add which could ensure that we don't unintendedly slow it down for some reason. That's my thoughts. Thank you for the presentation.
So, Brian, are you assuming that once the strategy is in place, that you come back to the Planning Commission for some zoning changes? Is that anticipated?
We'll come back to the Planning Commission to adopt the strategy, and I presume if there's significant changes coming out of the public meeting process, we perhaps even would have an advance memo describing that, but in lieu of a workshop. But yes, when the issue turns after the adoption of a strategy document to the implementing standards, primarily zoning, we would come back, and I think we'd probably want to come back first with a workshop.
Okay, thank you. And multimodal is personal devices of all kinds that we may not have even thought of yet. So I think I really echo what Commissioner Schauer was discussing in terms of how many modes there are or will be. The other thing I noticed on slide 31, could we go to slide 31 there? I see steps there. So I think about disabilities, Americans with disabilities, and aging in place. So it makes me think not that there are not alternatives where we see these steps, but I assume aging in place continues to be a priority for the city, and to think in those terms, and just something to be mindful of. When many people see steps, they think, I can't go there. So I like the direction the strategy is taking, and I don't have any further comments. Does anybody else have any other comments? Okay. Thank you, Brian. So Rebecca, any comments?
No additional comments, just that we'll be on break till 6:30 when we'll have community forum followed by the public hearing.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. See you at 6:30.
This conference will now be recorded.
Jim, just confirming that you're here.
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and just so everybody is aware, CVTV is recording this, and it looks like it's 6:30. So, and Brian is with us, I believe. Brian, do you want to confirm?
I am here.
Okay, great. Then we can get started whenever you're ready, Chair Liddell.
Okay. This is a continuation of the October 12th, 2021 Planning Commission. Earlier this evening, we had 2 workshops, one on the HQ Vancouver Fisher's Quarry work plan and another one on the Evergreen and Grand corridor strategy. This is the hearing part of our agenda, but prior to the hearing, we have a community forum. A community forum is held at each meeting of the Planning Commission. During the community forum, the public is invited to provide comments on any issue they wish to discuss. Each speaker is given a maximum of 3 minutes to address the commission on any issue of concern. Remarks should be directed to the Planning Commission as a body. Community members who wish to submit lengthy or detailed testimony are encouraged to provide their comments to Planning Commission at cityofvancouver.us. Please note that the community forum is different from testimony provided as part of a public hearing. In the case of public hearings, individuals that wish to testify on the public hearing item are called upon during that portion of the meeting. We appreciate, welcome, and consider public engagement. We're ready for our speakers, Julie.
Okay, first up we have Dan Packard. If you're on the line, you can unmute yourself. I don't know that I saw him.
While we're waiting, Julie, we're still seeing the intermission slide. We're not seeing that. There you go. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to the next person, Jeff Lavelle, and after that we'll have Don Steinke.
Good evening, everyone. Got a prepared statement I'm going to read from here. My name is Jeff Lovell, and as an owner of a CC zone property, really fast, I'm speaking on the Evergreen Grand plan. As an owner of a CC zone property, as well as the resident of the neighborhood, I want to offer some feedback on the proposed plan along the Evergreen Grand corridor. In general, I am supportive of the density and modification of the setback requirements. What strikes me is the unequal treatment of properties with identical zoning. I believe the reduction in max height, whether that be 3 or 4 stories, is beneficial to the feel of the neighborhood, but the standard should be extended to all parcels currently zoned CC and not just a subset of those parcels. As an owner of a property whose zoning would be effectively changed with this proposal, I am disappointed at the lack of outreach from the city as to the allowed use of my property. Second, and most importantly, I want to address the elimination of ground floor commercial requirement as required by Clark County Code along Evergreen. The purpose of community commercial zoning is clearly stated as commercial areas that are intended to provide for the regular shopping and service needs for several adjacent neighborhoods. Overwhelmingly, the feedback from the outreach sessions indicated a desire for more, quote, eating/drinking and, quote, small/local retail shops. Eliminating the ground floor commercial as required by the current zoning designation is going in the exact opposite direction. This proposal eliminates ground floor commercial for the entire stretch of Evergreen. This would all but ensure the existing commercial usage would slowly disappear over time as lots are redeveloped. Looking at the development on the southeast corner of Evergreen and Z Street as an example, has a lack of ground floor commercial in a CC zone. While these suites are billed as commercial live workspaces, they are not. They're being used in a manner which clearly violates the CC zoning which it was built. They are purely residential with fencing all the way to the sidewalk facing Evergreen. With the closure of Crosley Lanes, the neighborhood will be losing a bar, a restaurant, and an entertainment facility. If a development as large as recently as the recent Columbian article suggests, 270 residential units is to be developed with no ground floor commercial, there will be conservatively 450 residents with even less commercial businesses to support that increase in density. While I do appreciate this group's proposal to prevent big box stores and the like, the neighborhood, this can be achieved through pursuing a neighborhood commercial zoning, NC. I believe NC zoning would severely restrict the types of permitted uses, but it is another tool that this committee should consider. This plan refers to the area as a, quote, a locally oriented commercial corridor that boasts an emerging small business district, something we need more of in Vancouver. Neighborhood commercial districts with entertainment, dining, and shopping that support the area residents are precisely the purpose of ground floor commercial in a mixed-use development. The proposed plan does not support that outcome. Please consider reinstating the ground floor commercial requirement as required by Clark County Code, and I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Don Steinke, and we'll follow that with Greg Wilkie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Don Steinke. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Because of the advocacy of the Grassroots Environmental Coalition, of which I'm a part, the City of Vancouver is aiming to reduce air pollution with two policies. One is a ban on large new bulk fossil fuel terminals, and the other is a plan to reduce emissions community-wide 50% by 2030 or sooner, in order to be consistent with the goals of the state of Washington and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I'm here to encourage you to be supportive of those efforts. On September 30, the Washington State Building Code Council voted to move forward with a proposed code amendment to require that all water heating and space heating and new construction be done with electric heat pumps instead of with gas. The same requirement would apply whenever a permit was needed for the replacement of heating systems in existing buildings. That amendment will soon be put out for public comment. If they eventually approve that code amendment, the change would not be effective before 2023. But because of the Climate Commitment Act, new gas heating equipment will soon become stranded assets. Instead of waiting for 2023, I suggest that you will be doing property owners and tenants a favor by steering them away from equipment that will be obsolete before it is paid for. If that building code proposal is passed, that will help with our emissions reduction work here in Vancouver. Friends of the fossil gas industry like to say we need gas in the event that we have a power failure. However, pipes for fossil gas to new buildings are not our only option during a power outage. Other options include distributed energy resources such as solar on all rooftops, and aggregated batteries from electric school buses and electric cars, and energy storage. The cost of solar falls about 40% every time the number of panels installed is doubled, and the cost of batteries falls 18% every time the number made is doubled. I also attended the public hearing for the Northwest Power and Conservation Council last week. Their new draft plan featured 3.5 gigawatts of renewables by 2027. That's huge. That's like 3.5 Bonneville dams. Energy efficiency makes everything else easier. Next is for my prepared remarks in response to what I heard at the workshop. I urge you to recommend that all new developments, such as the Fisher's Quarry HQ development, be solar ready, EV ready in every parking spot, and be electric ready for all heating systems. PAE Engineering of Portland has built a 5-story building in downtown Portland at 2nd and Pine. Not only is it LEED Platinum, it is net zero energy. They welcome visitors to see what can be done. Make sure that the cost effectiveness in the Fisher's HQ project, make sure that the cost of housing is affordable to the people working there in the offices and in the retail and in the light industrial facilities. I encourage your support, and I'm available to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Greg Wilkie, if you're on the line. I'm not seeing Greg, so we'll move on to Teresa Hardy.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Hardy, and I'm speaking as a resident of Vancouver. As the city looks at upcoming projects, especially along 192nd, with a significant increase in high-density housing, hopefully staff, the Planning Commission, and the City Council will hold developers accountable for transparency. Mr. Hornstein, the representative for the new Blueprint Partners, and McKay Spacito, the developer, stated that the forested track would be retained at the August 9th City Council meeting. Unfortunately, much of the public perception was that the forested track was 19.1 acres. However, under the SEPA, the total forested track is approximately 35 acres, also confirmed by Charles Ray, Urban Forestry. The SEPA goes on to say that 70% of the forested tract will be retained, which would be 21.4 acres. City Council approved the rezone, retaining only 13.6 acres, which is a significant loss of the forested tract, which is a tract of 50-year-old Douglas fir. Moving forward, developers should be held more accountable for helping to reduce the 186 acres of community park deficit and the 44 acres needed for neighborhood parks. This is disheartening with the loss of the 21.4 acres, which was not clearly and openly communicated as a total of 13.5 acres of total tree area, leaving the public with misperception. This is a significant loss of trees that would help mitigate the impacts of climate and retain our mature canopy, as is been suggested with by the upcoming parks essential spaces. We have to continue to see our parks, our open spaces, and our mature tree canopy as essential spaces. Thank you so much, and look forward to the city moving in this direction.
That was all that I had. Who was registered?
Julie, it is a community member, Glenn Young, who's on the call, who wasn't able to sign up in time but does want to speak. So since we've had some folks drop out, I wanted to give him that opportunity if possible.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And what I would like to speak about this evening is the multifamily tax exemption. I've spoken about it many times to the council. I think I probably mentioned it to the Planning Commission a time or two. But you know, there's been a conversation going among the council, and they've kind of changed gears with the multifamily tax exemption program and its overall goal. And they've kind of modified it to where the goal being what the RCW was originally intended for, which was to catalyze development in areas of the city that we want it to grow. And I saw in the workshops, in the previous workshops, that we're talking about potentially changing the areas that allow or that are allowed to participate in the program. And my question is that if we already have 250 units that have already announced for the Heights area, and from my understanding, we already have one other project south of the Tower Mall that will be coming forward shortly. And so my question is, if those developments are already coming into play without the eligibility of qualifying for the MFTE, then why are we considering moving it to there and offering that as a form of incentivizing growth when it's already coming naturally? So I really feel like the multifamily tax exemption is an incredible tool that we can use throughout our city in various places, and perhaps we do use it in the Heights, but not in the context that it currently is. I suggest that we tailor the multifamily tax exemption to each individual area that we actually apply it to, that we establish specific goals for each individual area. I think for not Fourth Planning Ground, but Grand and Evergreen, it probably does need some financial incentive to start to develop the way that we want it to. The Heights, probably not. Fourth Plain area, absolutely. Areas like the Heights and the downtown area that probably don't any longer need the financial incentive, perhaps we can use it to achieve other goals that we have for those particular areas. And I'd love to see us tailor that program to each specific area, sub area that we make that area eligible for. And so we can actually achieve some things and have a good track record for what we accomplish with the program. So I appreciate you listening. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. That complete our speakers?
Yes,
So
I think so.
The community forum is closed. Just want to note that not only people who speak before us at the community forum, but the Planning Commission receives a great deal of letters via email. And I just want to assure the public, and I can vouch for my colleagues on Planning Commission, we read and consider each of those emails as well. So our next item is a public hearing on zoning map and text changes. Julie, do we have anybody signed up to speak to the public hearing this evening?
No, we did not get any speakers registered for this.
Okay. The role of the Planning Commission is to review and analyze proposed ordinances, comprehensive plan amendments, zoning changes, and other land use related issues. We follow a public process, including holding hearings during which the public has an opportunity to provide additional perspectives. In legislative matters, the role of the Commission is advisory. The City Council holds separate hearings, considers our recommendations, and makes a final determination. The Planning Commission will conduct a public hearing tonight and take testimony regarding the matter. Please, so we don't need all that next. As a reminder to my colleagues, please indicate to the chair when you want to be recognized. At the conclusion of asking for public testimony, the Commission will deliberate and make a recommendation to City Council. Would anyone on the Planning Commission like to disclose any conflicts of interest? Before we begin the hearing, please ensure that microphones are turned off or muted during the presentation. Please show respect for people testifying, whether or not you agree with them. Rebecca, do you have introductory comments?
I do, thank you, Chair. Planning Commissioners, you're used to this process. This is our public hearing on our annual zoning map and text changes. We brought these before you in workshop a couple months ago. And do want to note that we did have one proposed comprehensive plan map change, which has been withdrawn. So there are no comprehensive plan changes being proposed tonight, just zoning map and text changes. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian, Principal Planner, Community Development Department.
Thank you. And if I could have the first slide, please. So I have a very brief presentation for you this evening. These are the changes that were identified by staff. There's one zoning map change, 10 code changes. You reviewed these at a July 27 workshop. Next slide, please. And this is the zoning map correction, which was discussed on July 27th. It has two parts. One is to remove the parcel showing as checkered here in this map from the Greenway District boundary. That's an overlay zoning. And the property is 50 acres. It's owned by the port. We have representatives from the port here tonight who spoke with you at the workshop. The removal of the overlay zone would allow the property or create potential, or eliminate rather, potential confusion, because the underlying zoning of the property is industrial. It's been zoned that way for over a decade. When that change was made to establish the underlying industrial zoning, the greenway overlay should have been removed at the time. It was not. So this would correct for that. The second is a change to recognize what's move in the other direction, to include a parcel in the greenway zoning overlay map in the code that was annexed and should have been included at that time in the overlay zoning. And that's the westernmost property here indicated. Next slide, please. And so again, there's no changes to the current zoning other than the overlay removal. The future development of the port property, both properties are owned by the port, but of the port property zoned industrially would be subject to SEPA requirements. It would be subject to the city's critical areas protection standards. At this point, the port does not indicate they have a development proposal, and they simply would like to eliminate the confusion created by the competing overlay district zoning with the underlying zoning. Next slide. And so there's 10 zoning text changes. The changes to the language regarding fees, just to recognize that the Portland Metro Consumer Price Index isn't tracked anymore by the federal government. Changes to application vesting, to use the appropriate terminology. Changes to the the table in the zoning code that that matches the most similar Clark County zoning with the most similar city zoning for purposes of annexation, and a change in references in the code regarding final plats, change to eliminating a reference to septic systems for subdivisions, which are in fact not allowed. Next slide, please. Eliminating a footnote reference in single and multifamily zones, eliminating a implied allowance for mixed-use buildings in the industrial and OCI zones. They are in fact not allowed there because of the MX standards, so this would eliminate any confusion. Other clarifications, inaccuracies, and cross-references also being corrected. Next slide. And that concludes the presentation. We've had no public comments submitted prior to this meeting.
Is there a representative from the port here?
Yes, my name's Kathy Holtby. I'm the real estate manager for the Port of Vancouver.
Would you like to speak?
I think Brian's done a very good job of presenting what needs to be done. We came across this irregularity as we were going through our records, and had requested this change to be made so the zoning would be consistent and the greenway overlay would be removed. And that is our request.
Thank you. So questions from commissioners? Commissioner Atkins?
I have none at this time, Chair.
Commissioner Pyle?
No questions, thanks.
Commissioner Shower?
No questions, thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Schulte?
I have no questions either.
So just to clarify, no members of the public wish to testify. Is that correct, Julie?
Yes.
So the public testimony is closed. So is there any discussion before we move to entertain a motion? If not, the chair is ready to entertain a motion.
This is Commissioner Schulte, and I will make a motion that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council to adopt the proposed zoning map designation and text changes as presented tonight.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Shower, second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Schulte and seconded by Commissioner Schauer to forward a recommendation to City Council to adopt the proposed zoning map designation and text changes as described in the staff report this evening. If there's no further discussion, Julie, please call the roll.
Commissioner Schauer,
Approve.
Commissioner Atkins,
Approved.
Commissioner Schulte,
Approved.
Vice Chair Pyle,
Approve.
and Chair Liddell.
Approve. So the motion is unanimously approved, and there will be a forward that to City Council. Is there any other business this evening, Rebecca?
No, I just want to remind the Planning Commission and the public that our next meeting is October 26th, starting at 5 p.m. We only have one workshop item, and then we will have our typical community forum at 6:30. So we'll have a workshop, a break, and community forum, and then we will sign off. So I look forward to seeing you all in a couple weeks. Thanks for your time tonight.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.